So we've got the unofficial historian of Mulberry with us. I am super excited. He's going to have a ton of information that we can kind of talk about. Hey everybody, my name is Michael Coker. I'm the mayor of the city of Mulberry, and today we have a special guest. We have Mr. Eli Stancel with us. Can I call you the official historian of Mulberry, or is it unofficial? Like, what's the proper title?
I think unofficial is probably the way to go. But
unofficial. So we've got the unofficial historian of Mulberry with us. I am super excited. He's going to have a ton of information that we can kind of talk about. So first off, before we kind of dive in, just can you tell everybody a little bit about yourself? Where you from? Where'd you grow up? A little bit about that.
Sure. So growing up in the area, I was born and raised on Stancel Drive. So if you're familiar with kind of where the QT is at, they're at Hamilton Mill, not far from there. And that's where I was born and raised. And my family has roots in the area back to, we can trace to the 1790s. So we've been there for a good little while.
1790s. Okay, interesting. So your family originally came to that area in the 1790s?
That's correct. So, of course, all different branches of the family had moved in, but the Hill family in particular moved in and actually had a mill in the Appalachia. So part of Mulberry's border is the Appalachia River, and that was the western border of Georgia, and we had an ancestor that had a mill there on the Appalachia. So
interesting. So going all the way back to the mill. So obviously the city itself looked very different in the 1790s. Can you just kind of talk a little bit about, maybe let's go all the way back. I mean, when did the first settlers come to Mulberry? When did the first people come and kind of plant their roots there?
Yeah, so probably the first people group that we can truly trace are the Creek Nation, and they are descendants of the Muskogee Creek. So if you think about the mounds you see at Okmulgee or at Etowah, those are the original Native Americans in the area. And people talk about the Cherokees. The Cherokees actually moved in later. So they come in the 1700s and start displacing the Creeks. And that's when the Europeans start coming across. That 1790 reference, that references the Treaty of New York, which outlined the western border of the United States. And at that time, that was the Appalachia River. So 1790s is when you really start seeing the first of truly established settlers in the area. And it expands across the Appalachia in the 1820s. Although we weren't supposed to cross and settle on the other side, there's actually a letter of about 20 different families that had crossed and started settling in the Creek lands and had caused some issues back in the day.
Interesting. So kind of talk a little bit about what it was like kind of in that time period. I know I saw you at the Fort Daniel Fair, which is great if anyone gets a chance to go to that. But just kind of talk about Fort Daniel, kind of how that area kind of became settled.
Right. So what's unique, being the wild, wild west, you really have those people who are willing to live on the edge of the frontier, because there is a threat of retaliation from the Native Americans because of being on that frontier line. So what you have is kind of those hard scrap type people who are willing to do subsistence type farming, not grow things for huge profit, but mainly to sustain their families. And a lot of those folks are descendants or are Revolutionary War veterans, because the U.S. doesn't have a ton of money, but they've got all this land. So they'll give you, land in exchange for the service that you rendered. And so a lot of these people are moving to that land. And then that continues across as we move across the Appalachia. So it's 1812, and then further on, different people get that as a sort of as a land, lottery winnings for your service.
Interesting. I've always wondered that, because I was like, what motivated these people to come to the area, right? Because, I'm thinking if I live in, let's say, Savannah or, one of the more coastal towns, you had to have more luxuries there, right, at the time? So what motivated them? And you're saying it was free land basically for their service. Is that right?
Yeah, essentially that was the exchange, because the government had land, they didn't have money. And so, all right, well, we'll go out here, and you can even look in some of the Augusta newspapers in the time, and they advertise land or stores at the Hog Mountain. A great place for the Indian trade is what they say. So they're trying to get these people to move out here and take the commerce from the places like Augusta or Savannah and exchange it with the Native Americans. And of course, there were some dramatic stories that occurred on the frontier right there at the same time.
I was going to say that was going to be one of my questions. Is there any story or thing that stands out in your mind just from our area where you're like, hey, this was an interesting thing that happened that maybe people don't know about?
Yeah, so we often talk about how the internet can blow up a story these days. No different in that time. Just In the early 1800s, about 1812 or so, there was a Revolutionary War veteran named Kidd, and he had moved up and set up a store at what would be Hog Mountain. So if you kind of think where the Kroger is at right there,
Okay.
he had a store right there. And he was exchanging back and forth, and 4 Native Americans showed up one evening. Apparently they had been drinking a little bit and having a good time and threatened, and they wanted whiskey and salt, and push came to shove. He went to try to get some neighbors. Some gunshots were exchanged. Nonetheless, the story gets back to Augusta. Now, keep in mind, it was 4 Native Americans and just a couple of storekeepers. Mm-hmm. By the time it gets to Augusta, it's 50 Native Americans. By the time they print it in Savannah, it's 100. And then it actually shows up in the Baltimore newspaper in a couple of weeks with 300 to 500 Native Americans are ravaging across the frontier.
Wow.
So what went from just a disagreement over we want some whiskey and salt turned into a full-on front. So Facebook's got nothing on what used to happen.
That's so interesting. Now, so as the settlers come here and things kind of progress or start to develop, can you take us through maybe some of the major developments that kind of came in those early years?
Certainly. So kind of an offshoot from that kid story I just shared, there was a real concern along the frontier because there was a lot of conflict. The Creek Nation had an internal civil war, and so there was a lot of cross the Appalachie raiding back and forth. The governor instructs the Georgia militia to build forts every 10 to 20 miles, and Fort Daniel is one of those forts built in 1813 in response to these raids back and forth, as well as the fact the British are funneling goods to the Native Americans to fight the Americans from expanding as a part of the War of 1812. So that's how that happens.
That's interesting.
Now, very quickly after that, with Jackson's defeat of the Red Sticks Creeks and the defeat of the Battle of New Orleans of the British, we then move further across kind of the county. So that's when we start getting the rest of the city of Mulberry is now it's starting to move west. And so really it's only the frontier for about 20 or 30 years. And then it becomes kind of more of a pass-through where, hey, this is a known place of trade and a place that different roads can go. What kind of keeps it on the main thoroughfare is the fact of the Eastern Continental Divide. So you're sitting right atop the waters that split either going to the Gulf or the Atlantic, which makes for perfect wagon roads because you'll never have to get your wagon wheels wet if you stay on top of that ridge. And you're blessed with those high hills that allow that type of navigation so people are able to move through, and you have some stores and little towns and places developing. You have some small communities sprout up. So kind of that area around what is Hog Mountain would have been called Canes at one time, and Canes Circle is a derivation from that. There's a place called Algeron, which is down near Duncan's Creek area. That was a name, and at one time it was also called Grapevine in through there. So you look at some of the old letters, those are some of the town names. And they grew up where the people were kind of gathering, and this subsistence farming then changed into more of cotton crop farming as we moved through that Great Depression time period and through the 40s, and then to where we're at now, kind of more of suburbia and an outlying point of Atlanta.
Interesting. Well, now maybe you can help me, tell me if this is a rumor, if it's true. So I had heard a rumor that, obviously in Atlanta we know Peachtree, everything's Peachtree, Peachtree Street, Peachtree Road, Peachtree, industrial, that the original Peachtree Road ran from Atlanta to what is now Mulberry. Is that correct?
Yeah. So, and I'd say it ran the other way.
Okay.
Just being a native of the area. But there was a Native American trail that followed that Continental Divide. And what happened is during the War of 1812, in an attempt to get supplies to Andrew Jackson, we had the fort at Hog Mountain, or what would be known as Fort Daniel. And the U.S. military marched a small unit to Fort Daniel and essentially ordered them to cut a road and build a fort on the Chattahoochee River. They marched through this trail and they built a fort on the Chattahoochee River near what's called Bolton in modern-day Atlanta. They built the fort across the river from a place known as the Standing Peachtree, which was a Native American settlement there. Wash Collier, who was the first postmaster in the area, makes a comment about there being a large peach tree on the mound there at that Indian village.
Interesting.
The road that connected those forts that was going to move the supplies back and forth became known as the military road to the fort at Standing Peachtree. Now that's a mouthful, and just over time, you figured it out. It was just changed to Peachtree Road.
That's so interesting. And so if I were to try to track that road today, I mean, can you just take me through generally like where it would go through?
Yeah, so if you started at Fort Daniel, the Fort Daniel site, kind of where it went through, it would kind of curve down and then tend to follow kind of that 124 path, then branching off to Old Peachtree and making its way following Old Peachtree Road. Now, you'll occasionally see that road kind of jut off on either side, and that's the original road route because it would have been very curvy to follow that. If you went back the other way, kind of to the heart of the city of Mulberry, it would have continued to follow 124 going down toward the Browston-Houston area, or would have branched up toward Hamilton Mill, what we call Ridge Road, going toward that end of the city of Mulberry. Those would have been your two high thoroughfares coming through the city.
Interesting. Now, I know from obviously some of the other mayors in Gwinnett, I mean, a lot of these cities in Gwinnett built up around the railroad, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, you can trace Beaufort, Suwanee, Lawrenceville even to a certain degree. Obviously, we don't have a railroad that kind of runs right through the center of Mulberry. So did that inhibit us? How did that shape what Mulberry is today?
Yeah, I don't know that necessarily inhibited, and probably a weird thing from history past is the first planned railroad through Gwinnett County actually was going to go through the city of Mulberry. It was going to be called the Eatonton and Hog Mountain Railway. And it was going to come out of Eatonton and would have come up by not far from Pool Mountain, would have crossed over there and then made its way over to Peachtree Ridge. And as often happens with speculative stock deals, it fell through. But they had purchased some land in the city of Mulberry, and that went back to its original owners. The railroads being on either side, being kind of up in Beaufort or down toward the Lawrenceville side, that obviously pulled some business out of the area, but it also caused those thoroughfares to be successful because when the cash crop of cotton comes in, you start seeing a lot of guano or nitrate moving to and from, as well as cotton being hauled, to gin to those railheads. So it would have created the development of stores and local kind of tighter knit communities rather than the bigger communities of Beaufort and Lawrenceville.
Interesting. So as we, kind of come to the end here as we end the discussion, is there any kind of other interesting stories or facts that you're like, this is something that I guarantee most of your listeners don't know about the area?
Oh, let me think. I mean, there's so much. One of the things I think I'd lean into, and people have probably seen it as they've walked the park, is the rock cairns or the stacked rock.
Yeah, great question.
There was, since I was a kid and since my dad and generations before him have always talked about the stacked rock. And there's a lot there. There's also a lot up on Pool Mountain, kind of as you go Mineral Springs Road up over the top of the mountain. There are a ton of rocks, and they're not stacked like a farmer would normally stack. Mm-hmm. If you kind of go back and look, and we've done this, we looked at when that was farmed or handled. That's not good farming ground, and no farmer would ever stack his rocks in a certain way. So I think what you actually have there is probably a center of unique Native American culture that we just don't know a lot about because of the lack of recorded history. Mm-hmm. But from the placement and the shape of those rocks, I think we're in a place that probably has some very great historical significance to probably the Muskogee Creek people. Interesting.
That's very cool. And I've heard a lot about those mounds in the park and everything. And I've heard that there is a rich Native American history in the area as well. So, well, Eli, I just want to say thank you. I mean, this has been so fascinating. I hope you'll come back. I hope we can make this a regular thing because every time I talk to you, I learn 5 or 6 new things I didn't know before. But let me ask this. If anybody wants to kind of follow you, is there any, what's a good way for them to kind of stay in touch or to kind of see how you put out these updates about history?
Absolutely. So for Fort Daniel, which is kind of our local historic site, it is at fortdaniel.com. We post some things there, but as anywhere, we've got all sorts of social media that's out there as well. If you're interested in anything I do personally, I got a YouTube channel that's Ark State because I went to Arkansas State. So you can find me there, and I try to post a few things or as people ask questions, kind of help answer those. So.
Okay, awesome. And we didn't even get to touch on Elisha Wynn, but are you affiliated with that as well?
Yeah, we've a long time associate with the Historical Society, Gwinnett County. And as a supporter of Fort Daniel, we try to be there and make sure people know that, hey, when this house was built, this fort was right up the road, and this was the western frontier of the United States. So we try to make sure we have that connection tight.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. To everybody out there, obviously, if you like getting these updates, like and subscribe. Like I said, we'll keep them coming. And Eli, I can't thank you enough. That was so awesome. That was so informative. And hopefully you'll come back.
I will. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, my pleasure. Everybody, we'll see you next time.